Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are around the world. Welcome along. I'm not out in the wilds of Suffolk today. As you can see, I'm in space, and it's a very good reason why we're in space today. Joining me today is Michael Genest, NASA engineer who's part of the Artemis program, who is leading a team who's going to be putting man back on the moon very, very soon. So welcome, Michael Genest. Thank you very much for joining us again.
Hey, it's good to be back with you, Chris. Hello to you and to everybody else. Oh, what is it? 743 million now?
Not quite yet, but it's the numbers growing every day, and I'm amazed by it. I'm humbled by it, really am. So it's amazing. But thank you very much for being here, Michael.
Cool.
Thanks so much for coming back. So look, I'm blown away that you've taken time out of your schedule. You've been really, really busy, from my understanding, with this new program that you've been involved in. I just want to give a bit of a prelim of what I understand. Artemis is the project to put men back on the moon with a human habitation. Is that right?
That is correct. Although in the formal NASA politically correct speech, it's to put the first woman and the first person on the moon. So we are being inclusive about Artemis. Yeah, which is fine. But that's the way that NASA puts it these days.
Right, okay, because you have to be woken in order to operate nowadays. I get it, I understand. So I've got you've sent me over some things here from the Artemis program. Should we start with that? Do you want to guide us through what these images are of what the Artemis is about?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just give you a little background. These are slides that were actually presented at a space symposium that was, open to the public just this past summer in July, giving the overview of the basic mission architecture for the Artemis program. So it's all public domain, it's all available and taxpayer fund stuff, so we can share it with the world.
Great, but it's not widely distributed anywhere, really, is it? I mean, it was at the space fair, this event you were talking about, but it's not generally the public don't know. They haven't seen this too much. Is that fair to say?
No,
okay.
That's correct. It was a sort of in the space community kind of a thing.
Great. So, all right. So we're going to be sharing something pretty exclusive here today. I'm pretty excited about it. So I'll do a bit of a screen share, and then we'll bring this up, which is this one here. And okay. So can you see that okay on your end?
Not yet.
Okay.
Something's happening. Sometimes these things take a little bit while. Okay. There we go. I can see it now.
Okay, great. So this is the first image here, Artemis Base Camp. Now, one other question before we get too deep into this: who gets to name the missions? Obviously, Apollo and Artemis, twin brother and sister. Is that why the Artemis program is called Artemis, as following on from Apollo? Is that how it works?
Yes, that was exactly the rationale.
Right. Okay. Perfect.
It's the 21st century equivalent or evolution of Apollo.
Right. Okay. Excellent. So this first image here, obviously this is all CGI, computer generated imagery. But this first image here, what are we looking at here? This is a moon buggy. Is that going to be going up as part of the program?
Yes, and you'll see in the subsequent slides there are different elements that comprise the Artemis Base Camp that will be brought to the surface of the moon at various times and sequences. That one image that looks like a sort of a balloon at the top, that inflatable, that's the habitation. And then you've got the unpressurized rover in the right-hand lower right. And then you've got a couple of astronauts in EVA suits or extravehicular activity suits, also known as space suits, on the lower left. So, and we'll go through a lot. There's more about that in the subsequent slides.
Okay, let's get on to the next one. There we go. So Artemis Base Camp. Now, okay, so talk us through this one. Can you see that okay, you're in?
Yeah, yep. It is about a 3 or 5 second delay. Okay. So let me just talk you through some of the bullet points here. So we have the lander that we'll be using, and that's part of the program that I'm working on, is that human landing system that you see next to the what bullet. It has the capability to carry 4 astronauts to the surface at once. The old lunar module from the Apollo program can only take 2. So, we're getting better. 4 crew to the surface. The human landing system is the vehicle that takes them from lunar orbit to the surface and then back again. It's their ride to the surface and back. They have a different ride from the Earth to the moon orbit.
Yep.
And then they switch from via the gateway, which I'll talk about in a minute.
Yep.
They go into the gateway, then they transfer all their gear into the lander. The lander takes them to the surface. They do their thing for up to 30 days.
Yep.
And then they use the lander to come back up to the gateway. They transfer all the moon rocks and any other scientific results or core samples or whatever they got from the surface. They move that to the Orion spacecraft, which is what got them to the moon in the first place. And they take that back to Earth and re-enter, and Bob's your uncle.
Okay. Now,
And then,
question at this point. So is SpaceX affiliated anyway with NASA? And are you going to be using any of the technology to put any of this together?
actually, SpaceX has already won the contract for the first lunar landing, Artemis 3. Each mission has a number, just like, you had Apollo 11, Apollo 12, et cetera.
Yeah.
Well, SpaceX already won the contract to supply the lander for Artemis 3, which will be the first mission to put people back on the surface of the moon. And as you can see, in the early 2030s or late 2020s.
Right.
So right now, I am involved with another company that is bidding against SpaceX and several other teams to supply the lander for all the subsequent missions that will be to establish the base camp after Artemis 3. So, we're talking Artemis 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and however far out that contract ultimately goes. So the short answer to your question is yes, SpaceX is affiliated with NASA, with the Artemis program, as a provider of the first human landing system vehicle. And then the other landings are up for grabs based on what happens with the new contract that NASA is competing, called the Lunar Expedition Transportation System contract, which should be awarded by next summer. So you'll be hearing about that.
Right. Okay. Right. So we'll move on to the next slide. This is just the explanation of what we're looking at here, I think.
Yeah, and let me make one other point that's of extreme importance.
Sure.
From the other slide. The location that we are establishing the base camp at is the South Pole of the moon,
Right.
which we've never been to. None of the Apollo missions went to the South Pole. They all went to equatorial or mid-latitude landing sites because getting to the pole is a little bit more challenging. But because there is water ice at the South Pole of the moon,
Right.
in craters that are permanently shadowed, so the water hasn't all been irradiated out to space.
Right.
They think there may be billions of gallons of water locked into some of these permanently shadowed craters at the South Pole. And that is of enormous importance to the future for reasons we can get into later, but it's a huge thing.
Is that for fuel and oxygen for the breathing?
Well, yeah, it could be multiple things. Obviously, water is water. Humans need water. So if you have a place you can get water on the moon, you can use that to live on the moon, and you can also use it to supply water to vehicles that are going outward to Mars or farther out. Plus, water is H2O.
Yeah,
and
hydrogen.
you can split hydrogen from the oxygen, and guess what? You recombine them and it's rocket fuel. The space shuttle engines used liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen as their rocket fuel.
Yeah.
So it's rocket fuel as well. And then also the oxygen is breathable, of course. So
Yeah, of course.
you've got three things, two life support things, and then a propulsion thing. So super important stuff, water. Let's talk about this slide. Well, in the inset, you can see the human landing system there. You can also see the lunar terrain vehicle. That's the 21st century equivalent of the lunar rover they had on Apollo 15, 16, and 17.
Right.
It's unpressurized. The crew can bundle into there with their spacesuits on and use that to motor around. In the background, you can see the pressurized rover. It's called a habitable mobility platform in NASA speak, but we call it the pressurized rover because the crew can go in there in their suits and then take their suits off and they're in a shirt sleeve environment. It's a pressurized habitable space. They can live in that for, I think, up to 30 to 60 days. Right. Something like that. So it's a pretty, if you saw The Martian, the movie The Martian.
Of course, yeah.
With
Loved
Matt
it.
Damon, you know, he had
Matt Damon.
yeah,
I remember, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so there was that. You'll notice the habitation in the background, their foundation service habitat. That will serve as sort of like the headquarters. The crew living quarters will be in there. There'll be an airlock so they can do spacewalks in and out of that thing. It'll serve as a communications hub. It's where the crew will live and sleep and eat and do everything else that they can't do on the surface. And then in the deep background, you'll see that thing on that ridge at the edge of that crater. It's called Com, Nav, and Power. They have plans for a small nuclear system that will generate power. It could power an antenna array so that they can communicate back and forth to the Earth. And it can also serve as a place they could put a navigation beacon. So when future flights come to the Artemis base camp, they'll be able to home in on that navigation beacon and land precisely on the landing zone that is going to be established at the South Pole. You know, same thing as when you take a jet from, London to New York, they're using nav aids to home in on JFK or wherever you're going, or be it the other way, Heathrow. Those are all using nav beacons to help them home in on that runway. And we can use that on the moon, that kind of technology as well, to make the process of finding an exact landing spot on the moon simple. Nice. And then the last key thing on this slide is that thing called ISRU, ISRU. That stands for in situ resource utilization, which is a fancy way of saying little robots that go around and look for stuff that we can use.
Yeah, for sure. Okay.
Yeah, like ice or whatever other things may be of use. So anyway, that's the story. This is a nice little overview of all the different kinds of elements that will exist at the Artemis Base Camp.
Okay, great. Now, there's a couple of questions I've got here. Now, do these units all come separately, like the human habitat, the foundation service habitat and the vehicle and things like that? Do they come in separate missions? Like, is that the Artemis 1 program or Artemis 2? Because you said Artemis 4 was the first humans to land. Is all this other stuff going to be there before they land, or how does that work?
No, it's actually Artemis 3 will be the first one where they bring people back, and there won't be any of this stuff or not much of it there by then. That's going to be the first. They're going to be landing rough on that one because it'll be the first time. It'll be like your first beach. You're establishing your beachhead. But they will put all these other resources on the surface in a sequence that could follow. They may even precede Artemis 3 with 1 or 2. They may put the lunar terrain vehicle on the surface before Artemis 3, for example. They may have some little in situ resource utilization robots on the surface by then. So this is what we're planning right now. We are right in the middle of collaborating with the industry and NASA to decide exactly what is the optimal sequence of events to prepare the Artemis Base Camp. The equivalent that I like to use is Antarctica. I mean, you had crazy people like Amundsen who went to Antarctica with some dogs and a sled or two.
Of course.
It was pretty rough. But now you fly in on a big cargo plane and you go to this fancy hab and you eat hot meals, and it's luxury living compared to what those early guys had. Well, that's kind of what we're doing here is those initial missions to begin to establish an infrastructure on the surface of the moon that we can ultimately develop long term, and that we will also use to teach us how to go to Mars, which is another component here.
For sure. Okay. Now there's another question as well. I've been asked this many times, and this is something I've read in the past. Why people want to go to the moon? Obviously, it's a launch pad for going through because it's a lot less gravity that you have. You're off the Earth already, so a lot less gravity you have to push against to get out and to go to missions to Mars. But I've also heard that we could mine helium-3 as a fuel source from the moon. Is that part of? Do you know anything about that that kind of thing? These missions, is that part of the missions that are going to be taken on?
Well, you know, there's going to be all kinds of little vehicles and research and sensors going to the moon that'll be searching for all kinds of stuff. And helium-3 has been talked about for many, many moons as something that could drive a lunar economy, but it depends on the development of fusion reactors,
right?
Which are not like the nuclear reactors today that use fission, that split atoms. Fusion is combining them. And helium-3 turns out to be a very good fuel to drive fusion reactors. Yeah. But we have to get the fusion reactors developed first. Right. And of course, that's very, very early. When you talk to people, they always think, it'll be like in the 2050s before we get one that really works well. Right. But it could very well turn into a huge driver. It could become the 22nd century's version of oil. You know, right. Who knows? Yeah. Stay tuned. Very interesting possibilities there.
Okay, great. All right, we'll move on to the next one here. Notional Artemis Base Camp concept of operations.
Yeah, this is a very busy slide. We could talk about this for 30 minutes, but you know, the key thing is, you know, you see that gangly, spidery-looking thing that fly in the orbit around the moon. That's Gateway. A Gateway is going to be sort of like a transportation hub where the capsule, the spacecraft from the Earth will come and rendezvous with the Gateway, just like vehicles rendezvous with the space station today. Right. Yeah. Only this one isn't orbiting the Earth, it's orbiting the moon. So they'll come out, they'll dock to that, and the human landing system will already be in the vicinity of that orbit, or even already docked to Gateway. We're trying to figure out that sequence right now, what makes the most sense. But the crew will dock to the Gateway.
Sorry, just one question. So when the Gateway is the Gateway will be up there already, and then you're talking about the human landing system will be part of the Gateway when it's launched into orbit of the moon, or is that going to be a separate part that's going to be launched up and then connect to the Gateway?
Yeah, that second thing. We'll launch the human landing system later, and it will be in this lunar orbit, and then it will dock to Gateway. And like I said, the transportation hub. Yeah. It's like, just imagine, you know, you're going to make a change in buses. You're going to take a bus from Earth to the moon, and you're going to go to a bus station, and you're going to get off that bus and go into the station and get another bus, and that bus is going to take you from lunar orbit down to the surface. And that's the human landing system component, you know. Right. Yep. And then you can see, you know, it shows a bunch of in the lower left-hand corner, you can see all the uncrewed little bits and pieces of the infrastructure that ultimately will be awaiting the crew, not on Artemis 3, but on subsequent missions. All those things will be there. The crew will come down, they'll land, they'll get out. 2 of them will go to the pressurized rover. 2 of them will go to the HAB, and they'll split up, and they'll each have their own little subset of things to accomplish on the lunar surface for those 30 days or so. And then they will recombine, get back into the lander, come back up with all their, whatever they're bringing back up off the surface, fly back to the Gateway in the lander, transfer everything over to the Orion, and then return to Earth with their stuff, wash, rinse, and repeat for subsequent flights.
So basically the orbital Gateway will stay in orbit of the moon permanently, and then the landing craft, what fuel does that use to get on and off to the moon?
It could be anything. It's going to have to be like maybe a methane liquid oxygen combination. It depends, you know, like there are 5 teams competing for the privilege of designing and building the whole series of landers that will go to the surface. Right. Everybody has their own propulsion system concept. You know, for all I know, Starship, which is SpaceX's vehicle, may use kerosene and liquid oxygen. I don't know what they've got. Right. It's all very proprietary stuff. Everybody has their own thing. And I think in the case of the team I'm on, we're still doing trade studies to optimize the exact engine design and fuel combination.
Right. Okay, excellent. All right, shall we move on to the next slide?
Sure.
Okay, great. Moving to Gateway's architecture.
And I'll just mention one last thing. There was a little statement, a work in progress with much work to do.
Right.
And that is an understatement of the century. We are in the very beginning of really fleshing out the meat and potatoes of getting this done. It's one thing to have beautiful graphics that show everything, but the amount of detail, the amount of work and planning and research that has to go into making those things actually happen and decide exactly how we're going to do it. It's a mountain of work ahead of us. It's also very cool and fun work, but it's, you know, lots to do. So this is the slide that begins to reveal the connection between the Artemis program and the future Mars program. Of course, everybody wants to go to Mars, you know, and it's always been 10 or 20 years in the future. But this is NASA's most recent and hopefully final architecture that shows how we were going to use all the experience that we gained developing all this living on the moon hardware so that we can translate that and use it in the next iteration to take us to Mars. And so let me just go through that, you know, piece by piece. The Gateway, for example, is going to be permanently in lunar orbit. So it's going to show us long duration, zero gravity support away from the Earth.
Yep.
You know, orbiting another body. And you know, to get to Mars, that's at least a 6 to 9 month one-way trip to get there, and then another 6 to 9 months to get back. So we have to have, and you can't go there in a space capsule. I mean, can you imagine being in a VW bus, for example, or an SUV for 6 to 9 months before you got where you were going?
You go out of your mind.
You'd be out, exactly.
Yeah.
So you have to build something big enough to make it, you know, so the crew won't go bonkers for those, you know, as long as it takes to get out there. So it's something like, it'll be something like a Gateway-sized thing that actually takes the crew to Mars.
Right.
So that's something they got right in the movie The Martian, by the way. And if you haven't seen it, The Martian, unlike most science fiction movies, was the closest thing to realistic how NASA would do something.
Yeah.
And the kind of vehicles they would use. So that's an excellent reference point. So anyway, we have to have a substantial vehicle to get from Earth to Mars. Then you've got the crew size. You know, you don't want to send 2 people to Mars. You're going to send people to Mars. You want it to be worth your while. So you're going to have maybe 4 to 6 people going to Mars. So you need to learn how to, you know, that's what we'll be doing with Gateway, is having more and more crew in the environment of the moon for long periods of time. That'll be a useful learning experience. You've got your mobile expedition, which is just another version for the pressurized HABs. Sure. So again, I keep referring back to The Martian because it was so credible and so realistic. They had their mobile, pressurized mobile vehicle. You need that to get anywhere away from your pressurized habitation.
Sure.
Otherwise, you're constrained to only being able to explore as far as you can walk in a spacesuit and come back before your oxygen runs out.
And how long is that?
Well, you know, I think during the Apollo program, they didn't let them go more than a few hundred yards away from the lander.
Right.
Because they wanted to keep an eye on them, for one thing. They didn't want them to go over a ridge, disappear, and somebody fall and crack their space helmet, and nobody would ever know what happened, you know?
For sure.
But with these rovers, it gives the crew mobility, the ability to get out and away. And I mean, that's not news. I mean, the reason we all drive cars is because we don't want to have to live our entire lives within 5 or 10 miles of home, right?
For sure, absolutely.
So, and if you're going to spend $1 billion or $2 billion getting people to Mars, you don't want them to be stuck within 200 yards of where you land. That would be stupid.
Yeah, I agree.
Pressurized rovers.
Yeah.
Okay. And you also need power. You know, power is a big deal.
Of course.
And the problem with solar power, just like on Earth, is that the sun don't always shine. And when it gets dark, you know, you can't live without power, especially when you're in a hostile environment like that. So we need power systems. So again, the one we use on the lunar surface will be a great test for the material, the same system we'll use on Mars. And then the same thing with the robots we use to help us, dig around and test and look for useful commodities. The crew will be 1/6 G on the moon, and I think roughly 1/3 G on Mars. So
Right.
we'll be learning. We know a lot about how astronauts respond to 0 G, because we've had astronauts living in orbit for 20 years. What we don't have a lot of data on is how the human body responds to prolonged periods of low gravity, partial gravity.
For
So
sure.
we can learn a lot from that on the moon that will be applicable to Mars.
Yeah.
And then you've got your whole autonomous robotic systems and so forth that, is just there to help assist the crew doing things like handling communications and navigation and other things that make it easier for the crew to do their mission over there.
For
So
sure.
there's a definite translation. The moon is in itself a valuable thing to do because it's right there. I look at the moon as the 8th continent.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get to the moon. We can get to the moon a lot faster than people used to be able to get from Europe to the North America just 100 or 200 years ago.
For sure.
So the moon is really close. We can learn a lot there. And by the way, if things go wrong on the moon, you just get in your lander, and then you come home. You're only 3, 4, 5 days from home.
Yeah.
If something goes wrong on Mars,
You're stuck there.
adios, amigos.
Yeah, for
you're
sure.
done. Stick a fork in yourself.
Well, maybe
So,
they can make a quick phone call over to Matt Damon and, and get some tips.
Yeah, right. So we want to make all this hardware that we're going to use on Mars as bulletproof as possible from what we can do on the moon before we start pushing it out to Mars.
For sure. All right. So we'll move on because we've got a lot of slides to get through, a lot of stuff to talk about tonight. So unpressurized rover, that's just to get around. So that's we've been through that. Yep. Okay. Pressurized rover. This is more of the stuff that you're talking about, where you can actually live in this as well.
Yep. 30 days for 2 crew, and that's more like an RV.
Yep. Great. Yep. Looks great. Surface habitat. So are you looking to sort of have a permanent base on the moon, as in a permanent like domed base on the moon? Is that something that's sort of looking at in the near future or the distant future, or was there a thought on that as well?
Well, I think you're looking at the near future, these inflatable modules on top of a descent system. It'll be something along those lines initially, because that's just what we're capable of.
Sure.
In the long term, I mean, almost anything goes. I mean, supposing we find ways to use material on the moon,
yeah,
whether you make lunar concrete or you find metal and you can process metal, you can actually start manufacturing habitation structures using material on the moon. Hence that in situ resource utilization thing, where we're looking for stuff that we can use to live off the land once we get there. But that's what the foreseeable future looks like. And ultimately, we may get fancier and start developing something a little bit more permanent, like those old science fiction-y Buck Rogers big domes under a big city. I don't know if it'll ever look exactly like that. But if you want an idea what a future lunar colony might look like in 100 or 200 years, watch 2001: A Space Odyssey by Stanley Kubrick.
Loved it.
Yeah, well, lunar base they had there.
It's funny that you bring that up. I mean, every single conspiracy theorist in the world thinks that the moon landings were actually filmed by Stanley Kubrick. So that's, but I mean, 2001: A Space Odyssey was a brilliant piece of work. I agree. Just an absolute.
Yeah, but you know what the difference is? The difference is that you can't find the clavius base on the moon, but you could find all the stuff left over by Apollo 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, I've said many times, because I've been questioning this whole thing for most of my life. I mean, we've spoken about it before. And, I've said, why don't we just turn at one of the biggest telescopes on the Earth over to the moon and show me something that's there. I mean, it makes sense. And the response I keep on getting from people is, we can't do that. And I'm like, well, why not? There's so much stuff that we've left there, the lunar lander and other things that we've got. Why can't we just do that? I mean, I don't understand. We just settle this whole argument once and for all, you know?
Well, I can give you a practical reason why that wouldn't work. Say we did that. Say we said, okay, we're sick of this conspiracy nonsense. We're going to point the Hubble Space Telescope and we're going to make a beautiful picture of Apollo 11 landing site with the lunar modules and the flag still there, you know, and all those footprints.
Yeah.
But then you do that, right?
Yeah.
NASA publishes it. They publish this beautiful high fidelity digital imagery at the NASA website. And what's the first guy going to say? Oh, they faked that. Isn't they can fake a digital picture anyway?
Of course.
You know, you wouldn't prove it. You would not convince anybody. You know, people are going to believe what they're going to believe. And, you know, there's no point wasting valuable Hubble Space Telescope time just to give conspiracy theorists something else to scoff at. It's just a waste of time.
It's the whole, like we spoke last time about the whole flat earth thing, and you know, I'm dubious about everything. You know, I question everything. There's nothing that's off the table for me. I want to know everything. But I want to go into space and see it for myself, because it's one thing for people to go and say, oh, I saw it myself, but you know, I want to see it. You know, I want to be that person that goes up there and sees it for myself. I mean, you know, it's what I've always wanted to do since I was a kid. I've always wanted to do that, you know. So hopefully, if the things keep on going the way they are, I'll be a space tourist in some time in the next few years. But we'll see. I mean, I hope. I really do. I hope and pray that one day I get to experience that, where I get to see this ball Earth that we live on, you know.
Well, you never know. You know, the price is going to come down on those commercial space tourist rides. So live long enough, and anything's possible.
Well, I think I'm doing okay. I think I've got a few more good years left in me. So,
yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, I got a bit of time now, I think. So, okay, so surface power. So, module nuclear fission power source for up to 10 kilowatts. Now, I don't know whether you saw, I did a video some time ago about the future is bright, and it's, you know, it's now, and it was about 0-point energy devices that exist now, and it was I talked about 3 separate what do you call it? Geez, the word escapes me right now. Patents, 3 separate patents that were released by the US Navy for, and one of them was for a free energy device using 0-point energy, right? That exists. I mean, you know, that's how patents work. You can't have a patent unless you can prove that your patent is workable, you know? So that was released in January of 2020, or I think December or November or December of 2019, or yeah. So if we have that technology now, why are we talking about, you know, trying to find sources of power that we could operate on the moon? Why couldn't we take something like that would supply unlimited amount of power, unlimited amount of energy to the lunar surface? Why does it have to be developed? Is what I mean.
Yeah, I don't know anything about 0-point energy, but I do know something about a patent, the path a patent has to take, or a technology has to take from patent to a product.
Right.
For example, I was a partner in a commercial space plane company. It was called Exodus Space, and we had a patent that was developed by a very brilliant man in Wyoming. He's just a super guy. He developed it on his own, and it was a patent for a way to take the first stage of a space plane and blend it into the second stage. So you had one vehicle that was one lifting body,
right? And
you could use that to beat the rocket equation, if you will, so that you could actually have a space plane that could take off from a runway and make it all the way to orbit without needing some big fancy 21st century engine that doesn't
launch
exist
system.
yet.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Right. But the problem is, you may have a brilliant idea that is fleshed out enough to earn you a patent, but having the money and the research and the development to take it from the idea on paper to hardware that works, and even worse, hardware, or even better, hardware that is practical and cost effective, that's a whole other challenge.
For sure.
And I have no idea where the 0 point energy thing fits on that scenario. But even if it is viable, if it isn't like a perpetual motion thing,
Oh, it's a magnetic
it's
thing.
viable, there may be just development costs and other implementation issues that are hard to get from theory, patent theory, to hardware reality that's slowing it up. So
Right.
the next best thing we've got for power to be generated in a place where you can't always rely on solar, and where there is no wind and there is no geothermal energy,
Yep.
is nuclear, which makes the most sense, because you don't need to bring massive quantities of fuel to burn to provide your energy. You make it from a relatively low mass perspective. And believe me, mass is everything,
Yeah.
because it costs an enormous amount of money to get a pound or a ton of anything off the Earth's surface and out to space. So
It's funny you
whatever
should mention that.
whether it's a power source,
Yeah.
it's got to be low mass. And that's what this is. It's a small, relatively low mass piece of hardware that still delivers a lot of energy for a long time. And that's why this is what we want to do.
Yeah, well, that comes back to another point that I like to touch on when we talk about SpaceX and space flight in general, because it does take a lot of money and a lot of energy and to put things into space. But yet Tesla, SpaceX put a Tesla into space. I don't believe it. I don't believe that there's a Tesla flying around somewhere between here and Mars, a car. That it strains belief, that they shot a car into space and then shot it out towards the Mars. That strains credulity to me. You know what I mean? Surely you saw that.
Yeah, but I can explain that, because this is what makes it so cool, is that it is unbelievable and real at the same time. So let me explain how that works.
Yeah.
They put that thing up there on the Falcon Heavy, which is one of a SpaceX's. It's a heavy lift rocket. They've only flown it, I believe, once that I know of, but I could be wrong about that. But anyway, that was the first flight. So the first time you fly a rocket, it's an experimental machine. Right. You do not put a $400 million payload on the pointy end of an experimental rocket
of course.
that could blow up on the launch pad. You just don't. So what do you do? What do you do to lower your risk is you put some dummy weight. You want to simulate the weight of a payload, but you don't want to put something of any value. So people will put chunks of concrete or whatever up, literally put something, just a dumb chunk of something that weighs about what a payload would weigh. Well, Elon Musk, being Elon Musk, said, why should I put a chunk of concrete up there? I'm going to put a Tesla. It'll weigh about the same as a payload, and I'm going to get some really fantastic publicity when I show the world pictures of one of my electric vehicles in space with the guy with his arm out listening to David Bowie on his way to Mars. That was not only technically brilliant, it was marketing genius. And that picture you saw of that Tesla and that dummy astronaut in that convertible, that was absolutely real.
Right.
But it was a practical thing. It wasn't some crazy lark that he went off on. It served a practical purpose, and it was brilliantly cool all at the same time. It just makes me respect that dude just all the more.
Brilliant. All right, well, let's move on to the next one. In situ resource utilization. This is the mini robots you were talking about. To harness the whatever you can find on the surface. Is that right?
Yeah, and there's a lot of polysyllabic words there. Neutron spectrometer and system and spectrometer observing lunar operations and trident drill and all that kind of stuff. Let me put it in terms everybody will understand.
Yeah.
It's R2-D2 looking for interesting and valuable stuff on the surface robotically. Yeah. That's what it amounts to being, actually. And we're going to put as many of those little dudes on the surface as NASA can afford and as private industry can come up with. And we're going to use those to do a lot of the exploration, because when you have crew on the surface, you want to use them in ways that optimizes the fact that with a human being with a brain can do tons more than any robot can. Yeah. And you want to use them for the most complicated things that require real-time decision-making and adaptation. But you can use robots to do a lot of the simple stuff and still collect a lot of data. And that's what all these little guys are about. Only they're going to be focused on looking for things that we could ultimately take advantage of when we decide we want to live off the land.
Yeah, so like mini drill and testing units. So they're testing the core samples of drilling to see what substances are there that could possibly be used. That's basically what it's
right.
What it's
the same kind of thing they're doing with rovers on Mars. The rovers on Mars have little drills, and they drill down and take samples. It's the same sort of idea that we're going to be doing at the moon.
Great. All right. Well, let's move on to the next one. Commercial lunar payload services.
That's those, remember I said whatever private companies can come up with. Well, that's, NASA has a program called CLPS, Commercial Lunar Payload Services, where, companies can put together these little small robotic vehicles that can land on the surface and begin to do sensing and exploring and looking for things. It says NASA is soliciting payloads and landers to go to the lunar surface with a cadence of 2 deliveries per year to characterize the moon's surface, blah, blah, blah. Well, anybody that wants to bid on a payload, they can send to the moon that will yield useful information to NASA that will help us plan how we can use the moon and develop it efficiently. That's what the CLPS program is for. It's all those little R2-D2E kind of robots that we want to send onto the surface and do some exploring for us.
Sure. And I mean, is the Cola Wars going to be taken to the moon? Is like a Coca-Cola or Pepsi going to try and put one of these payloads on the moon to advertise on the moon surface? I mean, would that be possible?
Well, I mean, let's just presume there was a little, see that little rectangular white box on the top of that illustration there? For sure. Supposing Kleenex wanted to help fund this. Yeah. They could put Kleenex on the side of that thing.
So like they do in the movies, it's product placement.
Right, yeah, exactly. Hey, you know what? If that's what it takes, I'm all for it. I don't care. Put Kleenex on the
whatever gets the job done.
Yeah, right. As long as it gets the job done, it doesn't compromise anything technically. I mean, what the heck? We'll take your $50 million. So you have the right to put Kleenex on the side of a spectrometer. Go for it, man. Yeah, that's my personal view. I don't know that NASA's view is that way, but that's my personal view.
For sure. Now that sort of brings me to NASA is what, publicly funded, right? Is it or does NASA hold patents that they use the patents and those patents to fund themselves? How does the funding for NASA work? Do you know?
I wish. It's all taxpayer money. It's all budgeted by the president. You know the process. The president proposes a budget, and Congress decides how much of it they want to give them or more. And it's but it's all taxpayer money. NASA doesn't have investments that it can turn around. In fact, it's probably illegal for them to do that.
Right. Okay. I mean, I've seen other sort of government agencies that have investment arms that they can use to draw funds from. So I thought I'd ask that. Now, the other thing I'd like to ask as well is with this, we've heard about this new space agency, SpaceX, that Trump started. Has that got any affiliation with NASA? And if so, what does that entail? Do you know?
Okay, so first of all, SpaceX and SpaceX is completely a commercial entity.
Space Force. Space Force is what I meant. Sorry,
Space Force. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a different deal. Yeah. Okay, so ask the question again. I was processing SpaceX, not Space Force.
Sorry, no, Space Force. So Trump launched this new program, Space Force. Has that got any affiliation to NASA, or is it? What's the deal with Space Force? Is there any link to that in this program, or any other programs that NASA runs?
No, the Space Force is funded strictly from DoD budget, and NASA has its own separate civilian space budget, and I don't think the two meet. I don't know that there couldn't be a collaboration in the future. Like, for example, this Artemis Base Camp thing. Yep. Who's to say that the Air Force might not want to put a an antenna or something on a ridge at the Artemis Base Camp. Who knows? We'll
Yeah.
see.
Okay.
But right now, NASA and the Space Force are two completely separate entities with different missions.
Yeah, for sure. So that's military, and this is civilian.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So Gateway, this is the basically the lunar. This is going to be in lunar orbit. This is the basic. This is the what's the word I'm looking for?
It's the Lunar Space Station. Basically.
Lunar Space Station. That's exactly what I was trying to get to. Yep. Okay. Great. And that's
right. So we're going to have international partners contributing to this. You know, the Europeans are going to be contributing at least one of the modules, and we've got various contractors that NASA is funding to develop different pieces of this space station, and it's going to become the transportation hub for transiting from Earth to the surface of the moon, and we'll also be learning a lot about long-term living in space outside of Earth orbit, developing some technology and, you know, a variety of other missions that are still TBD. Okay. But the main thing from my perspective as an Artemis guy is our transportation hub for, you know, collecting logistics and transferring crews and all that kind of good stuff. It's going to be an important piece of the puzzle.
Great. Now, obviously, the first question I have to ask, there's two questions that go along with this kind of the Gateway and sort of lunar orbiting and Earth orbiting as well. So what we've been hearing a lot about lately is solar storms and mass coronal ejections coming from the sun. Now, obviously, that's going to affect, we here are protected by our atmosphere and by our magnetic field that surrounds the Earth. But the moon doesn't have that. I mean, how is this going to be? The Gateway is going to be more adversely affected by these cosmic radiation and by mass coronal ejections, or even, I mean, we look at the moon and we can see it's been peppered with asteroids and comets, and well, not comets, but asteroids hitting the moon. Is there any possibility that could be interfered with? The Gateway by these kind of events? Is that being taken into consideration? If so, how does that? How do you offset that? I mean, how do you look out for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me first of all get rid of the concern about, you know, actually things coming in and impacting this. I mean, actually, Earth orbit is way more dangerous than lunar orbit with respect to something actually coming along and smacking into you.
There's too much stuff out there.
We've got so much stuff. The Earth orbit is an enormous junkyard of stuff.
Yeah.
So there's everything from a paint chip that can actually partly break a window on a spacecraft. We've seen it on the space shuttle. To larger chunks of satellites that could just destroy you. So the Earth orbit is a lot more dangerous. That's why we have to keep track of everything bigger than a tennis ball, I think, is tracked by the Air Force out of Cheyenne Mountain and other places, right, just to keep the space station from taking a hit like that. But that's not a real problem for lunar orbit yet. Radiation is a major concern, not just for the Gateway, but for any operation on the moon and anything going out to Mars. Radiation exposure is a big deal, and but that's why we have to have. Normally, the background radiation in space is higher than we get exposed to, kind of like akin to getting an X-ray at the doctor's office or something, or a CAT scan.
Yep.
But if you have a massive solar event that pumps out a whole bunch of ionized radiation at one time from the sun, that can be very dangerous, which is why all of these vehicles have radiation shielding. And there is always at least one place in these vehicles that is extra shielded, where if there is a big coronal mass ejection, for example, the ground, and we will know it, of course, in advance. We'll tell the crew, get to the radiation safe haven, and we'll let you know, we'll blow the all clear when the radiation levels drop back to normal. Right. So that has to be true whether you're on the surface or anywhere else. So yeah, it has to be dealt with. And actually, with respect to going to Mars, where the crews will be exposed for months on end in interplanetary space, that is one of the biggest technical problems for us we have to solve to keep them safe. And not only the human beings, but electronics don't do well when they get bombarded by high energy particles or ionized radiation for any length of time. So we have to be, radiation shielding computers and things of that sort too. So it's definitely a challenge.
Right. We're going to come back to the radiation after we get through with this thing. And it's something we spoke about in our email correspondence. We'll get back to that after we've gone through the rest of the slides here, because this is really interesting. And it's the biggest question I get asked by everyone when I said I was going to be speaking with you again. So we'll come back to that if that's okay. But we'll move on to the next slide, because that's amazing. I'm really happy that we got through that. Okay, so we've got the transit habitat is next.
This is a vision of the kind of a vehicle that would be used to transit from Earth to Mars someday. You see the crew, keep the crew healthy and productive during long duration deep space stays. So obviously the crew needs, you can't pack them into a tuna can for 9 months and expect them to not be sick, dead, or crazy by the time they get where they're going. So you need something big enough to give them some reasonable, quality of life, that they can stay physically healthy and mentally healthy and so forth. And you need to, that just takes space. So this transit habitat is just a conceptual drawing of an inflatable module connected to some other hardware that can provide power and heat rejection and communications and whatnot. And the crew would live in the more spacious inflatable habitat. And there have been some prototypes by different companies of some of these inflatable modules, and they're really quite roomy. They're really very spacious, and and you can make them safe from radiation in a variety of different ways as well. So, but we're going to need something along these lines just to keep the crews healthy and sane and able to function on their way to Mars.
For sure. Now, obviously,
you don't want a disabled crew after a 9-month journey. The first thing you got to do is climb into a spaceship and land on Mars, which is a hugely challenging thing. You can't be 9/10 of a basket case and expect to be able to pull that off. You need to be
they've got to be all there. Now, obviously, you mentioned 2001, The Space Odyssey, that I'm pretty sure it was that movie where they had a spinning habitat to create an artificial gravity. Is that something that's been discussed as well?
I think it's been talked about as a possibility, but we know from our experience with the International Space Station, where those large solar arrays, they rotate to try to track the sun as the station goes around the Earth. And whenever you have moving parts, especially moving parts that have to keep moving almost all the time, it's like anything else. A moving part wears out. You blow a bearing, your lubrication dries up, or something, thermal distortions cause it to fail. So it's dicey. Now, if we can find a way to rotate something like they did again on the movie The Martian, or in 2001: A Space Odyssey, even, that would be great. It would solve the my bones are slowly dissolving in weightlessness problem.
For sure.
But the design has to be proven, and I don't know. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it soon. We don't have to worry about it now because it's 5 days to the moon, right? So no big deal.
But when you start talking about longer term missions like to Mars, I mean, that's another thing that you have to solve before you get there.
Yeah, and we're learning a lot about protocols to keep the crew, their muscle tones and their bones from decalcifying through International Space Station, because those crews, they're 6 months and in a few instances a year in totally zero G. So we have to put them through hours of daily exercise just to put some loads on their bones and their muscles to keep them from becoming spherical balls of fur, Good.
Great. All right. So here we are. The Moon to Mars architecture is inherently common. Oops.
Right. Yeah, which is just another way to say, hey, the same kind of problems we got to solve to go to and live on the moon are the sorts of problems we need to solve to do it on Mars as well, with some
For sure.
slight modification, you know?
Yeah.
And that's all the point of this is. It just shows the different aspects of how what we do on the moon is going to help us when we decide to go to Mars later.
For sure. Okay. So we go, that's that one, and then that's the end. Great. Okay. So I'll stop the screen share on that one. Come back. All right, there we are. Excellent. Now, we've spoken about, let me see here. I got sent a video that I forwarded on to you, and I'll quickly play the video if that's okay. It's about 1.5 minutes. I'll shorten it down as much as I can. We don't need to see all the fluff that goes with it, but I'll put that up here. So I'll do another screen share here, which is not that one. So I'll go to here for now. We won't, oh, hang on a minute. Get rid of that one, get rid of that one, and we'll go to this one. No, this one here, that one. Okay, so this is a little video that's on YouTube, and it says NASA admits humans can't pass through the dangerous Van Allen belts. We'll just quickly watch this, and then we'll talk about this for a moment.
We are headed 3,600 miles above Earth, 15 times higher from the planet than the International Space Station. As we get further away from Earth, we'll pass through the Van Allen belts, an area of dangerous radiation. Radiation like this could harm the guidance systems, onboard computers, or other electronics on Orion. Naturally, we have to pass through this danger zone twice, once up and once back. But Orion has protection. Shielding will be put to the test as the vehicle cuts through the waves of radiation. But Orion has protection. Shielding will be put to the test.
Okay, so anyway, we get the idea. So basically what they're saying is, in order for Orion to go through the Van Allen belt, shielding has to be in place, but the Apollo missions have already been to the moon. So he's saying that we have to solve these problems before we can send people through this Van Allen belt. You know, we solve the radiation problem to keep humans safe, the astronauts safe that are going to the moon. But surely this has already been solved if we've sent the Apollo missions backwards and forwards to the moon. So why can't we use the same technology that we had for these new missions?
Well, we are basically, you know, it's not true. We didn't really solve the radiation problem as in, oh, we can fly through those Van Allen radiation belts. We don't care about that. No, we didn't solve it. But okay, I've been thinking about this, anticipating this question. I'm going to use a little analogy.
Okay.
Imagine a donut. The Van Allen radiation belts surround like large, in the shape of a large donut. There's actually two of them, but let's just imagine they're one big giant donut around the Earth. Okay.
For sure.
And now, so imagine that donut on a tabletop, okay? Now you put a blueberry in the middle of the donut hole,
Okay.
and that's Earth. The
Yep.
donut is the radiation, the blueberry is Earth, and the astronauts are tiny specks of intelligence living on that blueberry.
Yeah.
Now, it turns out the donut is deadly poison. If you were to try to drink through the donut, you'd be dead in a heartbeat, okay? But you have to get off the blueberry and out of the donut altogether. Well, how do you do it? Well, duh, you don't go through the donut, you go over the donut. And that is basically what they did on Apollo, and it's basically what we're going to do when we do Artemis, is we're going to launch on a trajectory. Now, it's just, you know, you can imagine that blueberry is surrounded by the donut. If you were to go straight left or right, parallel to the top of the table, you'd be going right through the donut, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So what if you went up through the North Pole of the blueberry? You wouldn't go anywhere near the donut. Well, we can't launch from the North Pole, but we can launch from Florida even on an angle that just barely goes through the edge of the Van Allen radiation belts for a relatively short time, and then you're out of it and you're on your way to the moon. So that's how we solve it, is we shape the trajectory such that you are not exposed to those Van Allen belts for any longer than you need to be. That plus every spacecraft is shielded, the avionics are shielded, because, you know, it's not like you're out of the woods when you're past the Van Allen belts. You still have all that cosmic radiation to deal with,
sure.
solar radiation.
Yeah.
So, you know, you have to be shielded to some extent. So you beat the Van Allen belts just by, you know, we're just not going to go there. We're going to skirt around the edges of it and not worry about it.
Great. All right. So just I want to get an understanding. So from my understanding, the Earth's like a toroidal magnetic field, right? So it's in through the South Pole, out through the North Pole. So that's the magnetic field is like the apple, if you like, and the Earth is the center of the apple. Yeah. So the Van Allen belt is outside of that. Is that the magnetic field that we're talking about that surrounds the Earth? Is the Van Allen belt, or is that outside of that?
It's the Earth's magnetic field that creates the Van Allen radiation belt.
Right.
This radiation we're talking about, it's ionized radiation. It has an electrical charge. And the magnetic field of the Earth captures charged particles and collects them at certain points in the magnetic field. Fortunately, it doesn't collect them everywhere in the magnetic field. They're collected in these donut-shaped belts, which is why we have an opening to skirt the belts, or at least go through only the outer edges where the concentration of radiation isn't as intense as it is in the, you know, the real thick part of the belt.
Sure. Okay. Now, we did some research a few years ago, my wife and I, because we'd heard that obviously NASA astronauts were prone to cancers after they came back from space. Right. So we were doing some research, and we'd found a device called an FIR, infrared radiation tent, that you lay in, and it bombards your body with infrared radiation that basically rids your body of cancerous cells. Have you heard about that, or have you know of that? Of NASA, apparently NASA developed it for the astronauts when they came back from space missions.
Oh, no, I didn't know about that. But I will tell you one thing. The reason I don't know about it is because the crew health is something that NASA protects information about. That's why, you know, on the space station, even during shuttle missions, the crew had what we called PMCs, private medical conferences, with the Earth. In other words, most of the time when the crew talks to the Earth, everybody in the world can listen to it if they know what website to go to.
Sure.
But with PMCs, it was like, no, that was a private channel, because, you know, you wouldn't want everybody in the world listening to you and your doctor talk about, you know,
no one will want to listen to what my doctor and I talk about.
Right. So, you know, that's true of, you know, the astronaut health and medical stuff is kept as confidential as they can keep it. But you're right, there have been instances of some of the Apollo astronauts who died of cancer. And the question becomes, well, was that because they ate too many pork chops, or was that because they were in space and got radiated? You know, and I don't know. There may be a flight surgeon or two, or an organization in NASA that knows, has the data, but, you know, I wouldn't know anything about that.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it wouldn't surprise me. I mean,
like I say, it is. I mean, there's a lot of talk about it, and we spent a lot of time on it. You know, we've had to deal with that problem ourselves. But the FIR radiation tent, and it was amazing, absolutely amazing. It's incredible. Whenever you're feeling a bit run down, climb into the tent, bombard your body with the infrared radiation. I tell you, you come out $1 million. It's incredible, amazing piece of kit. So, yeah, we've used it. I use it all the time. It's amazing, incredible piece of kit.
Can you get one at Costco or, you know, on Amazon?
I don't know, because my wife bought it some years ago. It must have been 6 or 7 years ago now. It's basically, it's a dome. It's like a tunnel, if you like, and you lay on a mat, and then you pull the tunnel over yourself, and you lay inside it. You're naked, and then your body is bombarded. You have a thing that comes up to your neck, so you're covered from you're basically exposed from your neck down. And then you're bombarded from the mat underneath, and then bombarded from the tunnel above you. And then you set a timer and you set the temperature that you want to be bombarded at. And it's amazing piece of kit. I don't know where it came from, but FIR radiation far infrared radiation. You'll see them. They're amazing, amazing piece of kit. And with the amount that I work and the amount I punish myself, it's a great piece of kit. Really is amazing. Okay. Okay. So the escape.
I've got a quick heads up for you. I saw part of the PowerPoint that you were about to show, and I think you pulled up the wrong PowerPoint, because I think that was my icebreaker presentation that I sent you, not the ET one.
Right.
So unless everybody wants to spend the next 30 minutes talking about me, which they probably don't.
Right.
You want to find the other one.
Okay.
It should say something like, search for a file that either has ET in it or Alien from me, and it'll be a PowerPoint, and that's probably the one you want.
I'll tell you what, I'll close that one down because I'll close that one because we won't need that one. I'll close this one as well. We don't need that one. I won't go into my emails and look for that now. Maybe we'll talk about that another day. But let's while we're on the alien stuff, right? Because I've heard many stories, and maybe you can confirm or deny these, about when they did some of the original missions to the moon, that they let off a small tactical nuke on the moon to see if there was going to be a reverberation. And apparently, from what I've heard, the moon rang like a bell, like it was hollow. Do you know anything about that?
I don't know if it was nuclear. I know that they have crashed things into the moon, and they have put seismometers that pulsed the moon. I don't think it was nuclear, because sending anything nuclear into space, everybody freaks out.
For sure.
The rocket explodes. Everybody from Florida to Maine is going to get radiated to death. Something crazy like that. But I'm sure that you're right about that. And I'll tell you one interesting thing is that one of the reasons we know that there is water ice at the south pole of the moon is because they sent a probe to the moon, and it separated the probe, the sensing part, separated from the rocket that took it there, and that rocket was programmed to crash into the surface of the moon with two purposes in mind. One, it would help the seismological sensors figure out what the interior of the moon was like, and the plume from the impact would send material up off the moon, and they could do a spectral analysis of the plume and discover what was in the regolith that had been impacted. And that's where they saw evidence of water molecules. And that's why they believe that there's water at the south pole of the moon, among other things, among other reasons.
So I mean,
but no nuclear explosions, no.
Right. Okay. Well, maybe that was just one of those add-on to the the stories. I mean, the stories grow every day. It's like the fishermen catch a fish this big. It's always
right.
So I mean, look, I've also seen many things about the Earth. The moon wasn't always there. Right, there's lots of theories about when the moon became in orbit of the Earth. Now, one of those theories is that the moon was constructed, and that we've never seen the dark side of the moon. I mean, this is one of those things that is in conspiracy circles, and we only ever see one side of the moon, which is odd to start with. I mean, it really is strange. That we only ever see one side. But didn't the Chinese have a mission where they sent probes to the dark side of the moon and had photographs from that side?
Yeah, I'm gonna educate you on a couple of points here, and the rest of the team on it.
Great.
It's not technically the dark side; it's the far side, because when we have a full moon on Earth, it is the dark side. But when we have a new moon on Earth, the other side of the moon is fully lit. If you were looking at the moon from the other side of the moon, it would be a full moon to you when it's a new moon to the rest of us. Right. So it's the far side of the moon, and we have seen it. I mean, the Apollo astronauts orbited the moon,
right? So
they took lots of pictures of the other side, and we have a satellite called the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, LRO.
Yeah.
And it's been in orbit around the moon for I don't know how many years.
It's still there.
Mapping every square. It's still flying around it to take images, good images too. Not enough to see a boulder that you wouldn't want to land on, but good enough to give you pretty good high fidelity imagery of basically the entire lunar surface, including the far side. So
Right.
there's lots of information about it. And you're
Yeah.
right. The Chinese did put a little robotic rover and lander on the other side of the moon. They took some pictures and videos, sent it back.
Yeah.
So yeah, nothing mysterious about it. It's just a big rock.
Yeah, well, it is. It's one of those things. I mean, here's the other question: why have we never been back since 1972? Why have we never been back to the moon?
In a word, money.
Money.
Or
Right.
in another word, politics.
Right. Okay.
You know, by the time we did Apollo, you may not know this, but you know, the last moon landing was Apollo 17.
Right.
There was actually an Apollo 18, 19, and 20 that were canceled because Americans got bored with moon missions.
Yeah.
And the politicians didn't want to pay the money to keep funding it, you know? So it was politics and money that stopped it. That's the only reason. And NASA has taken this long to get to the point where it's like, okay, we need to get out of Earth orbit and go back and do something. And the first idea even back to the original George Bush Sr. presidency, it was, okay, let's go to Mars. But they could never get enough political support for the budget necessary to do something that aggressive.
Yeah.
And it didn't make sense to go straight to Mars anyway. We would have killed somebody doing that, or several somebodies. But this plan to go to the moon, refine the technology, learn how to live off the planet for long periods of time makes perfect sense. It's the right thing to do. It's a step-by-step thing.
Yeah.
You know, Magellan didn't just go around the Earth the day after somebody invented a boat, you know.
For sure.
They started sailing around the Mediterranean, you know, and all that. And then they decided to take a crack at the Atlantic, and then they decided to try going all the way around. You do these things in stages, and so that's why this makes the most sense. You know, moon first, then Mars, and then we'll take it out from there.
So the other that sort of leads on to the next thing. You know, we're obviously everything we hear about right now is climate change. I mean, you know, I'm so tired of this discussion as well. I in the video I recorded today, which is Sunday, that I'll be putting out later today. But by the time people see this, I'll probably post this on Wednesday. But I also say that I'm happy to debate anybody in the world that's a leading expert on climate change, because I'm so tired of just hearing climate change and there's no solution. All we're hearing about is just the words climate change and we have to do something, but there's no solution for this problem that they keep on telling us exists. But then we've got SpaceX, we've got NASA now. They all want to launch these missions into space and to the moon and to the Mars, but we're using a vast amount of fuel, which is, you know, we're people like myself are sort of getting our asses kicked and saying, well, you're the bad people by wanting to go on holiday once a year on a plane. But we're talking about NASA and SpaceX and all these other space agencies, European Space Agency, Chinese and Indian, and everyone's wanting to send more missions into space, which is using vast amounts of fuel, rocket fuel, which is, a pollutant, as we're told. So, I mean, how do you respond to that? I mean, how do we justify that if we're talking about, you know, we're not ruining the planet? How do we justify, you know, spending vast amounts of this rocket fuel to go into space?
Oh, man. Again. Okay, first of all, political statement. Anybody on your case because you want to go on a vacation once a year is a nit. You should just pat them on the head and send them away. You know, that's just ludicrous. You know?
I agree.
So,
I agree.
Yeah, you know, it's just stupid. So second thing, you know, the vast amount of fuel isn't as vast as you think. I mean, sure, it takes a lot. But I mean, do you know how much jet fuel we consume in a day just flying around the world for airlines? I mean, I guarantee you the amount of fuel that we spend with rockets is insignificant compared to what we spend just driving to the grocery store and flying people, you know, 1 million places all over the earth every day.
Or world leaders to the climate conference in Glasgow, you know, on 400 private jets.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. I guarantee you, George Clooney puts more carbon in the atmosphere flying to his place in Lake Como and back and forth to London and LA than NASA does.
Yeah, like Leonardo
maybe not quite
DiCaprio.
as much, but close.
Like Leonardo DiCaprio,
Yeah, okay,
made the documentary about telling everyone, oh, the climate change is going to ruin everything while he travels around the world to go to his film festivals on a private jet. You know, these people want to lecture us about being bad people, and they're doing exactly what they're telling us not to.
Yeah, the real toxic pollutant is hypocrisy. It's just
I agree.
But let me give you the best part of my rebuttal to the we're polluting the world with NASA stuff.
Yeah.
Do you know, like for example, a lot of the rockets that we use hydrogen and oxygen. Hydrogen is the fuel, oxygen is the oxidizer, because if you're on a rocket, you run out of oxygen pretty quick, leaving the atmosphere, right? So guess what happens, what you get out the pipe, the tailpipe, if you will, of your rocket when you combine hydrogen and oxygen in a rocket engine? You get water vapor. So yeah, we're polluting the earth with clouds.
No, don't do that.
Of
don't
water
do that.
Vapor. Yeah, it's terrible, you know, but, you know, not all rockets use hydrogen and oxygen, but, you know, all those, 30 years of space shuttle missions, everything coming out of the shuttle main engines was hydrogen and oxygen combined, okay? Yeah. A lot of the rockets are that way. And of the ones that use other fuels that aren't so environmentally green, the amount is not significant enough to worry about compared to what the rest of the human race is doing every single day.
For sure. Now I've got a couple of there's a couple of strange ones. I'll start with this one, which is really off the wall. Okay. Now if you're in space, okay, and you're weightless and you fart, would it drive you forward?
Somebody did so. It was a Russian cosmonaut that did something like that for fun on the space station once. I don't think it was farting, because I don't think he had enough gas to really make a difference, but it was something else. What was it? Anyway, the answer is Newtonian physics says yes. To every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction.
For sure.
But I would also say that mass matters. So if you expel, like a half an ounce of methane from your nether regions, pushing against 180 pounds of the rest of your flesh and bones, the propulsive delta V or delta velocity is probably insignificant.
Right.
So I don't think that. I don't think farting is going to be a practical transportation option.
Okay, because it leads me onto the next question, right? So, at what height above the Earth do we become weightless? And what is it? Is it a height thing, or is it what is it? What point do we become weightless?
Yeah, well, there's a difference between being weightless and being outside the effects of gravity.
Okay, yeah.
You could you can be weightless if you stand up on that chair and you jump off your chair. You are going to be weightless for a fraction of a second until your feet hit the ground, right? Sure. The only difference between you jumping off your chair and the astronauts on board the space station are that they are going so fast that they are falling towards the Earth at the same trajectory as the curvature of the Earth.
Right. So okay. Much like the comet rocket, the vomit rocket that they use to where they have a plane that goes up and then it falls down, and the people are falling at the same speed, so they appear weightless in the plane until the plane starts to go back up, and when they keep on going like that.
Same phenomena. It's like if you were in an elevator on the tallest building on Earth and cut all the cables and you fell in the elevator, you would be weightless in that elevator for however long it took you to hit the basement. And so yeah, I mean, weightless isn't really weightless. It's just you're free falling. It's really, that's the accurate term, is free falling. Right. And the best analogy I ever saw was the analogy of the cannon on the mountaintop, okay? So just imagine a simple little mountain with a cannon on top, and you fire the cannon, and the cannonball goes, and it follows a parabolic trajectory and hits the surface a mile away or 2 miles away. So you pack more gunpowder into the cannon, and you put another ball in, you fire it, and it goes 10 miles farther away. Well, just imagine you can get a cannon big enough that you could pack enough gunpowder in it that you could fire that cannonball so fast and overcome the air resistance of the atmosphere, of course, that it would just keep going all the way around the Earth and never intersect the surface until it came around and hit you in the back of the head.
Right.
That's basically what is happening to everybody who flies in space.
Yeah.
But instead of doing it at an altitude of a mountain, they're doing it at 150 miles or 250 miles or 300 miles above the Earth.
Right.
That's the only thing. It's
Right.
free falling. But I'll tell you another thing. You could be 5 light years outside of our solar system, and sure, you would be floating, but you would still be gently tugged by gravitational forces of every bit of mass within, millions and millions of miles. Gravitational off rapidly. I think it's as the cube or the square of the distance between you and the thing that you're attracting each other. So the gravitational forces drop off to almost insignificant very quickly when you get farther away from the Earth or any large body, but you're never completely 100.0% out of the effects of gravity.
Right. So it's the gravity that gives it that gives us the weight and the draw to the Earth. Yep. So
yes.
Because of that, I mean, we've seen, I've seen countless videos. Obviously, there's lots of stuff that NASA puts out to the public, and the astronauts who are on the space station, they're floating, the girls' hair is up in the air and all that kind of stuff. But we see them, and they're wearing harnesses. So if they're in an environment where they are seemingly falling or weightless or whatever you want to, why do they need to have harnesses and guide wires?
Well, the only time they wear that is when they are outside the spacecraft doing the spacewalk. When they're inside the vehicle, they don't wear that. They wear shorts and a polo shirt or a t-shirt or white overalls or something. But when they go outside the vehicle, then they're tethered.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to accidentally lose your grip and float away, and then you become your own personal satellite. And
yeah, you have to fight your way back to the space station. But that's not going to really work either, because you're trapped in your suit.
Yeah, right. But I'll say something else. Like, so you may have seen, or somebody may have seen pictures of them in a kind of a harness, but that's because they do that when they're exercising. There's a treadmill that they use on the space station, so they can actually run. Yeah. But they don't have they're free falling, so the only way they can run is they have to put like bungee cord harnesses
to hold them down,
force them down onto the treadmill.
Yeah, I've seen those.
Somebody may have seen that.
I've seen those, but there's videos of where you have 3 or 4 of these people they're side by side and they're talking to the camera, and they're spinning and doing other things, and then someone grabs them and pulls them in, and it's seemingly by a harness, by a guide wire that's they're suspended by. And this is one of those things. It's one of these conspiracy theories. But if you see the videos, and I mean I could show you one, not right now because I haven't got it teed up, but it's amazing. Maybe I can send you one of these things where you see them and they're actually grabbing something on the seemingly attached to the astronaut. That seems like it's like a wire, a guide wire that they're suspended by, rather than being weightless or falling. You know what I mean? It's a strange phenomenon. I've seen many times.
It's not. Yeah, seriously, I'd like to see it just for fun, but it's not. It's really not that. I mean, when you're weightless like they are, or in free fall, I should say, to be correct and consistent. Yeah. All it takes is for somebody to reach out and grab a tiny edge of your pant or a belt loop or something in your pocket or anything, just tug you and you just float right back where you were. So it may have looked like a wire or something, or they may even had a wire hanging out of their pocket or something from some experiment they were working on. But it's not because they've got a guy wire to fool everybody into thinking they're weightless. Those dudes are all weightless. They're all floating around up there.
It is, but like I say,
I'd like to see one to see where you could have, where you could imagine, wait a minute, that looks like a guy. What is that? I could probably see it and explain what it was. But
for sure,
I mean, look, it wasn't. They weren't faking it.
Yeah, no, it is because obviously there's a lot of green screen stuff that goes on for when they're doing stuff for like school kids and things like that. And green screening, you know, when you're green screening, obviously there's things that go in and out of focus, like me doing this, you know, and things go out of focus because the green screens don't work exactly as they should, you know. So there's a lot, like I say, the conspiracy theorists are always looking to pick holes in everything. I'm one of them, you know. I'm looking to pick holes in everything because I don't take anything at face value, nothing, because that's just the nature of how my mind works. I don't take anything at face value. I want to examine everything personally myself. And it's just when these kind of things are presented to me, I want to examine it. I want to understand it. And this is why it's such a privilege to talk to someone like yourself, who is in a position that you've been working in this field for so long. You know, it's amazing to be able to ask questions like this, because, you know, people are saying to me, oh, you have to ask this, you have to ask that. And it's amazing. So that's why I've got 2 pages of 2 pages of stuff that people say you have to ask. Now, there's one other thing. I know we're sort of getting close to time, and I know that you've got other things that you'd have to do, and I've got to do some other stuff as well. So from everything I've seen, especially about the rotation of the Earth and how things orbit the Earth, okay? So generally, the orbit goes around sort of equatorially around the Earth. You know, most satellites and things go equatorially. Is that correct?
No, they're all over the place. Some of them are over the equator. Geosynchronous satellites are over the equator because that's the way geosynchronous orbits work. A geosynchronous orbit is one where you want to be over the same spot all the time. Yeah. So you have to fly up to 22,000 miles above the Earth, above the equator, and then you're always over, you know, the Sahara, or you're always over Brazil or whatever, Ecuador. Right. But we have satellites in all kinds. We have polar satellites that orbit over and above the North and South Pole.
That's what I was going to ask about. That's what I was going to ask.
There's all different kinds of orbits.
Because from my understanding, this is what I'm saying, from everything I've read and heard, that the only things that go polar orbit is military. Is that correct?
They may have put there's some remote sensing, Earth remote sensing satellites too, because think about it. If you're in a polar orbit, you get to see the entire surface of the Earth. Yeah. Because the Earth is rotating beneath you and you're orbiting the other way around. So eventually you see the entire Earth's surface. So that's why remote sensing satellites are great for those kind of orbits. Yeah. So it's also good for military because you can recon everything too. So, you know, depends on what you're looking for.
Yeah, but how does that work? Obviously, with the rotational orbit of the Earth, and I mean, if you've got satellites going in the rotational orbit, how does a north-south or, you know, a polar orbit work in relation to how does that stay in orbit that way? That's the biggest question.
Well, you know, once you're off the surface of the Earth and you're in an orbit, it doesn't matter what direction, what way the Earth is turning or anything else like that. But I'll just give you a couple of instances. For example, equatorial launches. You know that the European Space Agency has a launch site in French Guiana, I believe it is, and they launch due east out of South America over, and why do they do that? Because it's on the equator or very close to it, and when the Earth is turning and you launch east, you're getting a boost from the Earth. You're jumping off a moving thing. So you get a little boost in that direction. So that's why they do it that way. Now let's move to Florida, Kennedy Space Center. You're flying out of Kennedy Space Center. If you fly, which is at 23.5 or 28.5 latitude. So if you were to launch due east out of Florida, you would get a little bit less of a boost because you're not getting the full equatorial velocity, but you're getting some, but you would be on an orbit that is inclined 23.5 degrees to the equator.
Right.
All right. Because right. So now imagine you go to Vandenberg Air Force Base in California, which is on a little thing that juts out from the West Coast. So if you point your rocket south out of Vandenberg and you launch out over the Pacific, you end up flying around, basically slightly inclined to the poles.
Right.
When you launch in that direction.
Because of where the position of where it is.
Right. That's the direction you launch in. And you don't get the advantage of the Earth giving you a little bit of a boost, because now the Earth is not turning in the direction that you're launching. Right. You're launching 90 degrees off that angle the Earth is turning. So you don't get that. So you have to have a more powerful rocket to get to
fight against those gravitational forces. Yeah.
Right. So that's how it's done. But, you can launch in almost any direction that your launch site will allow you to.
Right. Okay.
So, yeah.
Great. All right. So, okay. Muscle atrophy was what you answered before. Muscle atrophy is what it's called when you have the muscles and the bones breaking down. The muscle atrophy, that's what you have to keep the muscles and the astronauts working constantly, because they get atrophy of the muscles, right? That's the correct terminology.
Yep, that's right.
Great. I'm just like I said, I'm just going through my notes here. Here's one that I'm sort of eager to learn about. Now, when we were using the space shuttle, there was a big thing about the heat shields. When you're for re-entry, is that right?
Yeah.
So the heat shields, as you're coming back in, because is it the speed thing that creates the heat? Is it the speed?
Yeah, absolutely. So, everybody's been in the car and stuck their hand out the window and you feel the air against your hand. Well, at 60 miles an hour or 50 miles an hour, it's cool. It feels cool. Just imagine hitting the atmosphere at 17,500 miles an hour.
That's how fast it's going.
It's 17,500 miles is basically maybe by the time you hit the atmosphere, it's only 17,000 miles an hour. I don't know. But you're going 5 miles, more or less, you're more or less going 5 miles per second. All right. So that's what creates, at that velocity, the friction of the atmosphere over your surface creates heat, not cool.
Right.
It's too much of a good thing. And that's why you have to have very special heat resistant material to keep the atmosphere from melting your spacecraft. That was the problem with the Columbia accident, is they had damage to one of those protective tiles and they didn't realize it. They didn't see it. And when they hit the atmosphere, that superheated plasma, thousands of degrees, actually hit the metal structure within the vehicle and literally melted the structure of the shuttle, so that they had structural failure and it was all over.
Yeah. I remember that. I remember it well. So, it's amazing. We're coming up to 2 hours again. Every time we talk, it's 2 hours. I could talk to you all day. And hopefully when this current nonsense that we're living through is all over, I can come and visit. We can sit on your porch and we can have a conversation. I'd love that, but I'm not prepared.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
I'm not prepared to give in to any mandates or any kind of nonsense that I have to go through in order to get on a plane. So it's probably going to take a little time for me to be able to get there. But I hope that one day soon we can do that, and we can get together and shake hands and have a long conversation about these kind of subjects, because it is intriguing to me. I absolutely love it. So look, I think if we leave it there for today, and I can't thank you enough, Michael, for being here and just answering all these questions and going through this stuff. We didn't get to touch on aliens yet, but actually, I'll tell you what. Let's finish on sort of one alien question. Okay? So, do you personally think that aliens exist? And the second part of that question: are they here on the Earth as in this reality as we experience it now?
Yeah, well, wow, those are two great questions, and I'll tell you what, I think there's not a yes or no answer to do I believe that there are aliens. I think my answer is almost certainly yes. Almost certainly yes. Because of, we can go into a lot more detail if we do another one of these in a month or two. We'll go over the presentation slides on that subject, but just mathematical probability. I mean, we have just in the last 10 years or so, because of some of the advanced telescopes we put in space, we have been discovering planets around stars. And I kid you not when I say, when you look at the night sky, every single star you see that isn't actually a galaxy has planets around it. They're discovering planets that are as common as fleas on dogs. They're just there.
Yeah.
And the numbers of planets is in the hundreds of billions, likely. Now I'm asking myself, what is the probability? And by the way, of those hundreds of billions of planets, billions of them are probably Earth-like planets that could support life as we know it, much less beyond what we know. But as life as we know it could potentially exist on billions of those planets. So I asked myself, what are the odds that of all the planets in the universe, our planet is the only one with life on it? And I just say, there's no way. What a waste of real estate. Here we have to get into theology, or at least I do, because I ask myself, would a creator that created this stop with just one planet? No. Why wouldn't there be creations all over the place? I say to myself, what a waste of real estate and resource. It doesn't make any sense.
I agree.
Now, with respect to are they here? I don't know. I hope that they're here, because I think that would be cool until they start shooting the ray guns at us. Yeah. But I think if they were going to do that, they would have done it by now. Any alien race technologically advanced enough to make it here across an unimaginable distances between stars could kick our butts in a New York minute, not even break a sweat, Yeah. You have to assume that if they were hostile or aggressive like we are, they would have kicked our butts long ago. So you have to assume that either we are so primitive that we're not a threat to them, or they're just studying us the way we study insects, or they're studying us because they think, boy, these guys have some potential, but we better keep an eye on them because they look like they're kind of violent. And if they ever discover the technology that we have that lets us zip around the universe, they could really become a problem. So like in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, they might decide to destroy our planet to make way for a hyperspace bypass and eliminate our problem. Well, but, so far they haven't done that. So if they're here, they're probably not hostile, or they would have done it to us already. And if they're here, they're probably just studying us because, I don't believe that they had a secret meeting with Harry Truman or Ike Eisenhower and made a contract. Maybe they did. I don't know, but it's beyond my ability to know.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, short of what's going on CNN or BBC News or whatever, or Fox News, or short of one of them landing out on my lawn here and stepping out and saying, here are the drawings to our warp drive, you want them? I'm never going to know, and nobody's going to know unless you actually have what they call a close encounter of the third kind, So I'd like to think that they're real. I see the footage from the Air Force jets, and I hear the stories that happened at that Air Force base in England. And, something weird and unexplained is happening. But either nobody really knows what it is, or the people that know aren't talking much. Yeah. Every once in a while you hear some guy at a missile silo 40 years ago who had an experience, or an Air Force pilot, or a guy at that base in England, and they tell their story and you go, wow, that's interesting. But, how do you know if they interpreted what they saw correctly, And how do you know they're not making it up or something else? You just don't.
No, of course.
So I hope that they're here, but I don't know that they're here. And all we can do is wait and see if something develops.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I know that I did a talk about this some time ago where I said, I think the probability is less extraterrestrial from another planet, more interdimensional. But I mean, you could do lots of crossovers there, because if you are talking about traveling vast distances, you might need to use interdimensional pathways to travel those vast distances rather than try and travel through space, which is dangerous, as we know. So,
right, absolutely.
Yeah. So, look, on that note, aliens, interdimensional portals, we'll finish it there. But Michael, thank you so much for your time. As always, it's a pleasure to see you, a pleasure to talk with you. And thank you so much for spending the time with me and my audience, and for answering all these questions. And hopefully in the future, when you get a bit more time, and when your project is not so crazy, we can talk again, and we'll go through. Hopefully then I'll have a bunch of stuff ready to go, and we can talk about it, and we can kick it backwards and forwards, the whole extraterrestrial, interdimensional stuff, and because I think it's fascinating, and I'd love your thoughts on it. So, thank you very much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Hey, no sweat. I love the time spent with you chatting about this and that. I hope the rest of the folks watching this got something out of it. Keep those questions coming. I'll be more than happy to answer anything you guys want to talk about. So thanks for the invitation to join you today, Chris.
Great, pleasure. So everyone watching at home, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for spending time with Michael and myself. Stay tuned. We've got much more stuff coming up in the near future. I've got some crazy interviews coming up. I hope you all enjoy it. I hope you've all enjoyed this one. And please, anything you'd like to speak with myself and ask Michael in the future, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below. But as I always finish, go out into the world, do good and be good, and we can change the world with our thoughts and our actions and with the way that we talk to each other. So thank you one and all for being here. I look forward to seeing you real soon. Take care of each other and take care of yourself. Ciao for now.